Chapter 21 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 21. Lorna ends her story. It is not a 12-month yet, although it seems 10 years agone, since I blew the downy globe to learn the time of day, or set beneath my chin the veinings of the varnished buttercup, or fired the foxglove cannonade, or made a captive of myself with dandelion fetters. For then I had not very much to trouble me in earnest, and went about romancing gravely, playing at bo peep with fear, making for myself strong heroes of grey rock or fir tree, adding to my own importance, as the children love to do. As yet I had not truly learned the evil of our living, the scorn of law, the outrage, and the sorrow caused to others. It even was a point withal to hide the roughness from me, to show me but the gallant side, and keep in shade the other. My grandfather, Sir Ensor Doone, had given strictest order, as I discovered afterwards, that in my presence all should be seemly, kind, and vigilant. Nor was it very difficult to keep most part of the mischief from me, for no Doone ever robs at home, neither do they quarrel much except at times of gambling. And though Sir Ensor Doone is now so old and growing feeble, his own way he will have still, and no one dare deny him. Even our fiercest and most mighty swordsmen, seared from all sense of right or wrong, yet have plentiful sense of fear when brought before that white-haired man. Not that he is rough with them, or querulous, or rebukeful, but that he has a strange soft smile, and a gaze they cannot answer, and a knowledge deeper far than they have of themselves. Under his protection I am as safe from all those men, some of whom are but little akin to me, as if I slept beneath the roof of the King's Lord Justiciary. But now, at the time I speak of, one evening of last summer, a horrible thing befell, which took all play of childhood from me. The 15th day of last July was very hot and sultry, long after the time of sundown, and I was paying heed of it, because of the old saying that if it rain then, rain will fall on 40 days thereafter. I had been long by the waterside at this lower end of the valley, plaiting a little crown of woodbine crocketed with sprigs of heath, to please my grandfather, who likes to see me gay at supper time. Being proud of my tiara, which had cost some trouble, I set it on my head at once, to save the chance of crushing, and carrying my grey hat, ventured by a path not often trod. For I must be home at the supper time, or grandfather would be exceeding wrath, and the worst of his anger is that he never condescends to show it. Therefore, instead of the open mead, or the windings of the river, I made short cut through the ash trees covert which lies in the middle of our vale, with the water skirting or cleaving it. You have never been up so far as that, at least to the best of my knowledge, but you see it like a long grey spot from the top of the cliffs above us. Here I was not likely to meet any of our people, because the young ones are afraid of some ancient tale about it, and the old ones have no love of trees where gunshots are uncertain. It was more almost than dusk down below the tree leaves, and I was eager to go through, and be again beyond it. For the grey dark hung around me, scarcely showing shadow, and the little light that glimmered seemed to come up from the ground. For the earth was strewn with the winter spread and coil of last year's foliage, the lichen claws of chalky twigs, and the numberless decay which gives a light in its decaying. I, for my part, hastened shyly, ready to draw back and run from hare or rabbit or small field mouse. At a sudden turn of the narrow path, where it stopped again to the river, a man leaped out from behind a tree, and stopped me, and seized hold of me. I tried to shriek, but my voice was still, I could only hear my heart. "Now, Cousin Lorna, my good cousin," he said, with ease and calmness, "your voice is very sweet, no doubt, from all that I can see of you. But I pray you keep it still, unless you would give to dusty death your very best cousin and trusty guardian, Allan Brandir of Loch Awe." "You, my guardian?" I said, for the idea was too ludicrous. and ludicrous things always strike me first, through some fault of nature. "I have in truth that honour, madam," he answered, with a sweeping bow, "unless I err in taking you for Mistress Lorna Doone." "You have not mistaken me. My name is Lorna Doone." He looked at me with gravity, and was inclined to make some claim to closer consideration upon the score of kinship; but I shrunk back, and only said, "Yes, my name is Lorna Doone." "Then I am your faithful guardian, Alan Brandir of Loch Awe, called Lord Alan Brandir, son of a worthy peer of Scotland. Now will you confide in me?" "I confide in you!" I cried, looking at him with amazement. "Why, you are not older than I am." "Yes, I am, 3 years at least. You, my ward, are not 16. I, your worshipful guardian, am almost 19 years of age." Upon hearing this, I looked at him, for that seemed then a venerable age; but the more I looked, the more I doubted, although he was dressed quite like a man. He led me in a courtly manner, stepping at his tallest to an open place beside the water, where the light came as in channel, and was made the most of by glancing waves and fair white stones. "Now am I to your liking, cousin?" he asked, when I had gazed at him until I was almost ashamed, except at such a stripling. "Does my cousin Lorna judge kindly of her guardian and her nearest kinsman? In a word, is our admiration mutual?" "Truly I know not," I said; "but you seem good natured, and to have no harm in you. Do they trust you with a sword?" For in my usage among men of stature and strong presence, this pretty youth, so tricked and slender, seemed nothing but a doll to me. Although he scared me in the wood, now that I saw him in good twilight, lo, he was but little greater than my little self, and so tasselled and so ruffled with a mint of bravery, and a green coat barred with red, and a slim sword hanging under him, it was the utmost I could do to look at him half gravely. "I fear that my presence hath scarce enough of ferocity about it," he gave a jerk to his sword as he spoke, and clanked it on the brook stones. "Yet do I assure you, cousin, that I am not without some prowess; and many a master of defence hath this good sword of mine disarmed. Now if the boldest and biggest robber in all this charming valley durst so much as breathe the scent of that flower coronal, which doth not adorn, but is adorned," here he talked some nonsense, "I would cleave him from head to foot, ere ever he could fly or cry." "Hush," I said, "talk not so loudly, or thou mayest have to do both thyself, and do them both in vain." For he was quite forgetting now, in his bravery before me, where he stood and with whom he spoke, and how the summer lightnings shone above the hills and down the hollow. And as I gazed on this slight fair youth, clearly one of high birth and breeding, albeit over boastful, a chill of fear crept over me, because he had no strength or substance, and would be no more than a pincushion before the great swords of the Doones. "I pray you be not vexed with me," he answered in a softer voice, "for I have travelled far and sorely, for the sake of seeing you. I know right well among whom I am, and that their hospitality is more of the knife than the salt stand. Nevertheless, I am safe enough, for my foot is the fleetest in Scotland. And what are these hills to me? Tush! I have seen some border forays among wilder spirits and craftier men than these be. Once I mind some years agone, when I was quite a stripling lad—" "Worshipful guardian," I said, "there is no time now for history. If thou art in no haste, I am, and cannot stay here idling. Only tell me how I am akin and under wardship to thee, and what purpose brings thee here." "In order, cousin, all things in order, even with fair ladies. First, I am thy uncle's son. My father is thy mother's brother, or at least thy grandmother's, unless I am deceived in that which I have guessed, and no other man. For my father, being a leading lord in the councils of King Charles the Second, appointed me to learn the law, not for my livelihood, thank God, but because he felt the lack of it in affairs of state. But first your leave, young Mistress Lorna, I cannot lay down legal maxims without aid of smoke." He leaned against a willow tree, and drawing from a gilded box a little dark thing like a stick, placed it between his lips, and then striking a flint on steel made fire, and caught it upon touchwood. With this he kindled the tip of the stick, until it glowed with a ring of red, and then he breathed forth curls of smoke, blue and smelling on the air like spice. I had never seen this done before, though acquainted with tobacco pipes, and it made me laugh until I thought of the peril that must follow it. "Cousin, have no fear," he said. "This makes me all the safer. They will take me for a glowworm, and thee for the flower it shines upon. But to return. Of law I learned, as you may suppose, but little, although I have capacities. But the thing was far too dull for me. All I care for is adventure, moving chance, and hot encounter. Therefore all of law I learned was how to live without it. Nevertheless, for amusement's sake, as I must needs be at my desk an hour or so in the afternoon, I took to the sporting branch of the law, the pitfalls and the ambuscades, and of all the traps to be laid therein, pedigrees are the rarest. There is scarce a man worth a cross of butter but what you may find a hole in his shield within 4 generations. And so I struck our own escutcheon, and it sounded hollow. There is a point, but heed not that, enough that being curious now, I followed up the quarry, and I am come to this at last. We, even we, the lords of Loch Awe, have an outlaw for our cousin, and I would we had more, if they be like you." "Sir," I answered, being amused by his manner, which was new to me, for the Doones are much in earnest, "surely you count it no disgrace to be of kin to Sir Ensor Doone, and all his honest family." "If it be so, it is in truth the very highest honour, and would heal 10 holes in our escutcheon. What noble family but springs from a captain among robbers? Trade alone can spoil our blood, robbery purifies it. The robbery of one age is the chivalry of the next. We may start anew, and vie with even the nobility of France, if we can once enroll but half the Doones upon our lineage." "I like not to hear you speak of the Doones as if they were no more than that," I exclaimed, being now unreasonable. "But will you tell me, once for all, sir, how you are my guardian?" "That I will do. You are my ward because you were my father's ward, under the Scottish law, and now my father being so deaf, I have succeeded to that right, at least in my own opinion, under which claim I am here to neglect my trust no longer, but to lead you away from scenes and deeds which, though of good repute and comely, are not the best for young gentlewomen. There, spoke I not like a guardian? After that can you mistrust me?" "But," said I, "good cousin Alan, if I may so call you, it is not meet for young gentlewomen to go away with young gentlemen, though 50 times their guardians. But if you will only come with me, and explain your tale to my grandfather, he will listen to you quietly, and take no advantage of you." "I thank you much, kind Mistress Lorna, to lead the goose into the fox's den. But, setting by all thought of danger, I have other reasons against it. Now come with your faithful guardian, child. I will pledge my honour against all harm, and to bear you safe to London. By the law of the realm, I am now entitled to the custody of your fair person, and of all your chattels." "But, sir, all that you have learned of law is how to live without it." "Fairly met, fair cousin mine. Your wit will do me credit, after a little sharpening. And there is none to do that better than your aunt, my mother. Although she knows not of my coming, she is longing to receive you. Come, and in a few months' time, you shall set the mode at court, instead of pining here, and weaving coronals of daisies." I turned aside, and thought a little. Although he seemed so light of mind, and gay in dress and manner, I could not doubt his honesty, and saw, beneath his jaunty air, true mettle and right bravery. Scarce had I thought of his project twice, until he spoke of my aunt, his mother, but then the form of my dearest friend, my sweet Aunt Sabina, seemed to come and bid me listen, for this was what she prayed for. Moreover, I felt, though not as now, that Doone Glen was no place for me, or any proud young maiden. But while I thought, the yellow lightning spread behind a bulk of clouds, 3 times ere the flash was done, far off and void of thunder. and from the pile of cloud before it, cut as from black paper, and lit to depths of blackness by the blaze behind it, a form as of an aged man, sitting in a chair loose mantled, seemed to lift a hand and warn. This minded me of my grandfather, and all the care I owed him. Moreover, now the storm was rising, and I began to grow afraid. For of all things awful to me, thunder is the dreadfullest. It doth so growl, like a lion coming, and then so roll, and roar, and rumble, out of a thickening darkness, then crack like the last trump overhead through cloven air and terror, that all my heart lies low and quivers like a weed in water. I listened now for the distant rolling of the great black storm, and heard it, and was hurried by it. But the youth before me waved his rolled tobacco at it, and drawled in his daintiest tone and manner. "The sky is having a smoke, I see, and dropping sparks and grumbling. I should have thought these Exmoor hills too small to gather thunder." "I cannot go, I will not go with you, Lord Alan Brandir," I answered, being vexed a little by those words of his. "You are not grave enough for me, you are not old enough for me. My Aunt Sabina would not have wished it, nor would I leave my grandfather without his full permission. I thank you much for coming, sir, but be gone at once by the way you came. And pray how did you come, sir?" "Fair cousin, you will grieve for this, you will mourn, when you cannot mend it. I would my mother had been here, soon would she have persuaded you. And yet," he added, with the smile of his accustomed gaiety, "it would have been an unco thing, as we say in Scotland, for her ladyship to have waited upon you, as her graceless son has done, and hopes to do again ere long. Down the cliffs I came, and up them I must make way back again. Now adieu, fair cousin Lorna. I see you are in haste to night, but I am right proud of my guardianship. Give me just one flower for token." Here he kissed his hand to me, and I threw him a truss of woodbine. "Adieu, fair cousin. Trust me well. I will soon be here again." "That thou never shalt, sir," cried a voice as loud as a culverin, and Carver Doone had Alan Brandir as a spider hath a fly. The boy made a little shriek at first, with the sudden shock and the terror. Then he looked, methought, ashamed of himself, and set his face to fight for it. Very bravely he strove and struggled, to free one arm and grasp his sword, but as well might an infant buried alive attempt to lift his gravestone. Carver Doone, with his great arms wrapped around the slim gay body, smiled, as I saw by the flash from heaven, at the poor young face turned up to him. Then, as a nurse bears off a child who is loath to go to bed, he lifted the youth from his feet, and bore him away into the darkness. I was young then. I am older now. Older by 10 years, in thought, although it is not a 12-month since. If that black deed were done again, I could follow, and could combat it; could throw weak arms on the murderer, and strive to be murdered also. I am now at home with violence, and no dark death surprises me. But, being as I was that night, the horror overcame me. The crash of thunder overhead, the last despairing look, the death piece framed with blaze of lightning. My young heart was so affrighted that I could not gasp. My breath went from me, and I knew not where I was, or who, or what; only that I lay and cowered under great trees full of thunder, and could neither count, nor moan, nor have my feet to help me. Yet hearkening, as a coward does, through the brushing of the wind and echo of far noises, I heard a sharp sound as of iron, and a fall of heavy wood. No unmanly shriek came with it, neither cry for mercy. Carver Doone knows what it was, and so did Alan Brandir. Here Lorna could tell no more, being overcome with weeping. Only through her tears she whispered, as a thing too bad to tell, that she had seen that giant Carver, in a few days afterwards, smoking a little round brown stick, like those of her poor cousin. I could not press her any more with questions, or for clearness, although I longed very much to know whether she had spoken of it to her grandfather or the counsellor. But she was now in such condition, both of mind and body, from the force of her own fear multiplied by telling it, that I did nothing more than coax her, at a distance, humbly, and so that she could see that some one was at least afraid of her. This, although I knew not women in those days as now I do, and never shall know much of it, this, I say, so brought her round, that all her fear was now for me, and how to get me safely off, without mischance to any one. And sooth to say, in spite of longing just to see if Master Carver could have served me such a trick, as it grew towards the dusk I was not pleased to be there, for it seemed a lawless place, and some of Lorna's fright stayed with me as I talked it away from her. End of chapter 21. Recording by Michelle Harris. Of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R. D. Blackmore. Chapter 22. A Long Spring Month. After hearing that tale from Lorna, I went home in sorry spirits, having added fear for her, and misery about, to all my other ailments. And was it not quite certain now that she, being own full cousin to a peer and lord of Scotland, although he was a dead one, must have naught to do with me, a yeoman's son, and bound to be the father of more yeomen? I had been very sorry when first I heard about that poor young popinjay, and would gladly have fought hard for him. But now it struck me that after all he had no right to be there, prowling, as it were, for Lorna, without any invitation, and we farmers love not trespass. Still, if I had seen the thing, I must have tried to save him. Moreover, I was greatly vexed with my own hesitation, stupidity, or shyness, or whatever else it was, which had held me back from saying, ere she told her story, what was in my heart, to say, vidi licet, that I must die unless she let me love her. Not that I was fool enough to think that she would answer me according to my liking, or begin to care about me for a long time yet, if indeed she ever should, which I hardly dared to hope. But that I had heard from men more skilful in the matter, that it is wise to be in time, that so the maids may begin to think, when they know that they are thought of. And, to tell the truth, I had bitter fears, on account of her wondrous beauty, lest some young fellow of higher birth and finer parts and finish might steal in before poor me, and cut me out altogether. Thinking of which, I used to double my great fist, without knowing it, and keep it in my pocket ready. But the worst of all was this, that in my great dismay and anguish to see Lorna weeping so, I had promised not to cause her any further trouble from anxiety and fear of harm. And this, being brought to practice, meant that I was not to show myself within the precincts of Glen Doone for at least another month; unless indeed, as I contrived to edge into the agreement, anything should happen to increase her present trouble and every day's uneasiness. In that case she was to throw a dark mantle, or covering of some sort, over a large white stone which hung within the entrance to her retreat, I mean the outer entrance, and which, though unseen from the valley itself, was, as I had observed, conspicuous from the height where I stood with Uncle Reuben. Now coming home so sad and weary, yet trying to console myself with the thought that love o'erleapeth rank, and must still be lord of all, I found a shameful thing going on, which made me very angry. For it needs must happen that young Marwood de Whichehalse, only son of the Baron, riding home that very evening, from chasing of the Exmoor bustards, with his hounds and serving men, should take the short cut through our farmyard, and being dry from his exercise, should come and ask for drink. And it needs must happen also that there should be none to give it to him but my sister Annie. I more than suspect that he had heard some report of our Annie's comeliness, and had a mind to satisfy himself upon the subject. Now, as he took the large ox horn of our quarantine apple cider, which we always keep apart from the rest, being too good except for the quality. He let his fingers dwell on Annie's, by some sort of accident, while he lifted his beaver gallantly, and gazed on her face in the light from the west. Then what did Annie do, as she herself told me afterwards, but make her very best curtsy to him, being pleased that he was pleased with her, while she thought what a fine young man he was, and so much breeding about him. And in truth he was a dark, handsome fellow, hasty, reckless, and changeable, with a look of sad destiny in his black eyes that would make any woman pity him. What he was thinking of our Annie is not for me to say, although I may think that you could not have found another such maiden on Exmoor, except, of course, my Lorna. Though young Squire Marwood was so thirsty, he spent much time over his cider, or at any rate over the ox-horn, and he made many bows to Annie, and drank health to all the family, and spoke of me as if I had been his very best friend at Blundell's, whereas he knew well enough all the time that we had naught to say to one another, he being 3 years older, and therefore of course disdaining me. But while he was casting about perhaps for some excuse to stop longer, and Annie was beginning to fear lest mother should come after her, or Eliza be at the window, or Betty up in Pig's house, suddenly there came up to them, as if from the very heart of the earth, that long, low, hollow, mysterious sound which I spoke of in winter. The young man started in his saddle, let the horn fall on the horse steps, and gazed all around in wonder; while as for Annie, she turned like a ghost, and tried to slam the door, but failed through the violence of her trembling. For never till now had any one heard it so close at hand, as you might say, or in the mere fall of the twilight. And by this time there was no man, at least in our parish, but knew, for the parson himself had told us so, that it was the devil groaning because the Doones were too many for him. Marwood de Whichehalse was not so alarmed but what he saw a fine opportunity. He leaped from his horse, and laid hold of dear Annie in a highly comforting manner. And she never would tell us about it, being so shy and modest, whether in breathing his comfort to her he tried to take some from her pure lips. I hope he did not, because that to me would seem not the deed of a gentleman, and he was of good old family. At this very moment, who should come in to the end of the passage upon them but the heavy rider of these doings, I, John Ridd, myself, and walking the faster, it may be, on account of the noise I mentioned. I entered the house with some wrath upon me at seeing the gaze hounds in the yard, for it seems a cruel thing to me to harass the birds in the breeding time. And to my amazement there I saw Squire Marwood among the milk pans, with his arm around our Annie's waist, and Annie all blushing and coaxing him off, for she was not come to scold yet. Perhaps I was wrong, God knows, and if I was, no doubt I shall pay for it, but I gave him the flat of my hand on his head, and down he went in the thick of the milk pans. He would have had my fist, I doubt, but for having been at school with me, and after that it is like enough he would never have spoken another word. As it was, he lay stunned, with the cream running on him, while I took poor Annie up and carried her in to mother, who had heard the noise and was frightened. Concerning this matter I asked no more, but held myself ready to bear it out in any form convenient, feeling that I had done my duty, and cared not for the consequence. Only for several days dear Annie seemed frightened rather than grateful. But the oddest result of it was that Eliza, who had so despised me, and made very rude verses about me, now came trying to sit on my knee, and kiss me, and give me the best of the pan. However, I would not allow it, because I hate sudden changes. Another thing also astonished me, namely, a beautiful letter from Marwood de Whichehalse himself, sent by a groom soon afterwards, in which he apologized to me, as if I had been his equal, for his rudeness to my sister, which was not intended in the least, but came of their common alarm at the moment, and his desire to comfort her. Also he begged permission to come and see me, as an old schoolfellow, and set everything straight between us, as should be among honest Blundallites. All this was so different to my idea of fighting out a quarrel, when once it is upon a man, that I knew not what to make of it, but bowed to higher breeding. Only one thing I resolved upon, that come when he would, he should not see Annie; and to do my sister justice, she had no desire to see him. However, I am too easy, there is no doubt of that, being very quick to forgive a man, and very slow to suspect, unless he hath once lied to me. Moreover, as to Annie, it had always seemed to me, much against my wishes, that some shrewd love of a waiting sort was between her and Tom Faggus; and though Tom had made his fortune now, and everybody respected him, of course he was not to be compared, in that point of respectability, with those people who hanged the robbers when fortune turned against them. So young Squire Marwood came again, as though I had never smitten him, and spoke of it in as light a way as if we were still at school together. It was not in my nature, of course, to keep any anger against him, and I knew what a condescension it was for him to visit us. And it is a very grievous thing, which touches small landowners, to see an ancient family day by day decaying; and when we heard that Ley Barton itself, and all the manor of Linton, were under a heavy mortgage debt to John Lovering of Ware Gifford, there was not much, in our little way, that we would not gladly do or suffer for the benefit of De Whichehalse. Meanwhile the work of the farm was toward, and every day gave us more ado to dispose of what itself was doing. For after the long dry skeltering wind of March and part of April, there had been a fortnight of soft wet; and when the sun came forth again, hill and valley, wood and meadow, could not make enough of him. Many a spring have I seen since then, but never yet two springs alike, and never one so beautiful. Or was it that my love came forth, and touched the world with beauty? The spring was in our valley now, creeping first for shelter shyly in the pause of the blustering wind. There the lambs came bleating to her, and the orchis lifted up, and the thin dead leaves of clover lay for the new ones to spring through. There the stiffest things that sleep, the stubby oak and the sapland beech, dropped their brown defiance to her, and prepared for a soft reply; while her over eager children, who had started forth to meet her through the frost and shower of sleet, catkined hazel, gold glove withy, youthful elder, and old woodbine, with all the tribe of good hedge climbers, who must hasten while haste they may, was there one of them that did not claim the merit of coming first? There she stayed and held her revel; as soon as the fear of frost was gone, all the air was a fount of freshness, and the earth of gladness, and the laughing waters prattled of the kindness of the sun. But all this made it much harder for us, plying the hoe and rake, to keep the fields with room upon them for the corn to tiller. The winter wheat was well enough, being sturdy and strong sided; but the spring wheat and the barley and the oats were overrun by ill weeds growing faster. Therefore, as the old saying is, "Farmer, that thy wife may thrive, let not burr and burdock wive; and if thou wouldest keep thy son, see that bine and gith have none." So we were compelled to go down the field and up it, striking in and out with care where the green blades hung together, so that each had space to move in and to spread its roots abroad. And I do assure you now, though you may not believe me, it was harder work to keep John Fry, Bill Dadds, and Jem Slocum all in a line and all moving nimbly to the tune of my own tool, than it was to set out in the morning alone and hoe half an acre by dinner time. For instead of keeping the good ash moving, they would for ever be finding something to look at, or to speak of, or at any rate to stop with, blaming the shape of their tools perhaps, or talking about other people's affairs, or, what was most irksome of all to me, taking an advantage as married men, and whispering jokes of no excellence about my having or having not, or being ashamed, of a sweetheart. And this went so far at last that I was forced to take two of them and knock their heads together, after which they worked with a better will. When we met together in the evening round the kitchen chimney place, after the men had had their supper and their heavy boots were gone, my mother and Eliza would do their very utmost to learn what I was thinking of. Not that we kept any fire now, after the crock was emptied, but that we loved to see the ashes cooling, and to be together. At these times Annie would never ask me any crafty questions, as Eliza did, but would sit with her hair untwined, and one hand underneath her chin, sometimes looking softly at me, as much as to say that she knew it all, and I was no worse off than she. But strange to say, my mother dreamed not, even for an instant, that it was possible for Annie to be thinking of such a thing. She was so very good and quiet, and careful of the linen, and clever about the cookery and fowls and bacon curing, that people used to laugh and say she would never look at a bachelor until her mother ordered her. But I, perhaps from my own condition and the sense of what it was, felt no certainty about this, and even had another opinion, as was said before. Often I was much inclined to speak to her about it, and put her on her guard against the approaches of Tom Faggus; but I could not find how to begin, and feared to make a breach between us, knowing that if her mind was set, no words of mine would alter it, although they needs must grieve her deeply. Moreover, I felt that, in this case, a certain homely Devonshire proverb would come home to me, that one, I mean, which records that the crock was calling the kettle smutty. Not of course that I compared my innocent maid to a highwayman, but that Annie might think her worse, and would be too apt to do so, if indeed she loved Tom Faggus. And our cousin Tom, by this time, was living a quiet and godly life, having retired almost from the trade, except when he needed excitement, or came across public officers, and having won the esteem of all whose purses were in his power. Perhaps it is needless for me to say that all this time while my month was running, or rather crawling, for never month went so slow as that with me, neither weed, nor seed, nor cattle, nor my own mother's anxiety, nor any care for my sister, kept me from looking once every day, and even twice on a Sunday, for any sign of Lorna. For my heart was ever weary, in the budding valleys, and by the crystal waters, looking at the lambs in fold, or the heifers on the mill, labouring in trickled furrows, or among the beaded blades, halting fresh to see the sun lift over the golden vapoured ridge, or doffing hat from sweat of brow, to watch him sink in the low grey sea, be it as it would of day, of work, or night, or slumber, it was a weary heart I bore, and fear was on the brink of it. All the beauty of the spring went for happy men to think of; all the increase of the year was for other eyes to mark. Not a sign of any sunrise for me from my fount of life, not a breath to stir the dead leaves fallen on my heart's spring. End of chapter 22. Recording by Michelle Harris.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 23. A Royal Invitation. Although I had for the most part so very stout an appetite that none but mother saw any need of encouraging me to eat, I could only manage one true good meal in a day at the time I speak of. Mother was in despair at this, and tempted me with the whole of the rack, and even talked of sending to Porlock for a druggist who came there twice in a week. And Annie spent all her time in cooking, and even Lizzie sang songs to me, for she could sing very sweetly. But my conscience told me that Betty Muxworthy had some reason upon her side. "Lat the young Osber alone," say I. "Make such ado about 'em with hogs' puddens, and hock bits, and lamb's meat, and whatten bread indeed, and brewer's ale afore dinner time, and her not to zit with no winder open. Drive me mad, he do, the ovey. Such a passel of fools. Do 'un good to starve a bit, and tak some on's wackedness out of 'un." But mother did not see it so, and she even sent for Nicholas Snowe to bring his 3 daughters with him, and have ale and cake in the parlour, and advise about what the bees were doing, and when a swarm might be looked for. Being vexed about this, and having to stop at home nearly half the evening, I lost good manners so much as to ask him, even in our own house, what he meant by not mending the swing hurdle where the Lynn stream flows from our land into his, and which he is bound to maintain. But he looked at me in a superior manner, and said, "Business, young man, in business time." I had other reason for being vexed with Farmer Nicholas just now, namely, that I had heard a rumour, after church one Sunday, when most of all we sorrow over the sins of one another, that Farmer Nicholas Snowe had been seen to gaze tenderly at my mother, during a passage of the sermon wherein the parson spoke well and warmly about the duty of Christian love. Now, putting one thing with another, about the bees, and about some ducks, and a bullock with a broken kneecap, I more than suspected that Farmer Nicholas was casting sheep's eyes at my mother, not only to save all further trouble in the matter of the hurdle, but to override me altogether upon the difficult question of damming. And I knew quite well that John Fry's wife never came to help at the washing without declaring that it was a sin for a well-looking woman like mother, with plenty to live on and only 3 children, to keep all the farmers for miles around so unsettled in their minds about her. Mother used to answer, "Oh fie, Mistress Fry, be good enough to mind your own business." But we always saw that she smoothed her apron and did her hair up afterwards, and that Mistress Fry went home at night with a cold pig's foot, or a bowl of dripping. Therefore on that very night, as I could not well speak to mother about it without seeming undutiful, after lighting the 3 young ladies, for so in sooth they called themselves, all the way home with our stable lantern, I begged good leave of Farmer Nicholas, who had hung some way behind us, to say a word in private to him before he entered his own house. "Wi' all the pleasure in life, my son," he answered very graciously, thinking perhaps that I was prepared to speak concerning Sally. "Now, Farmer Nicholas Snowe," I said, scarce knowing how to begin it, "you must promise not to be vexed with me for what I am going to say to you." "Vexed with thee? No, no, my lad. I have knowed thee too long for that, and I've either with my best friend afore thee, never wronged his neighbours, never spak an unkind word, never had no meanness in him, took a fancy to a nice young 'ooman, and never kep her in doubt about it, though there wasna much to zettle on her. Spak his mind like a man, he did, and right happy he were wi' her. Ah, well a day, God knoweth best, I never shall see his like again, and he were the best judge of a dung heap anywhere in this county." "Well, Master Snowe," I answered him, "it is very handsome of you to say so. And now I am going to be like my father. I am going to speak my mind." "Right there, lad, right enough, I reckon. Us has had enough of preliminary." "Then what I want to say is this: I won't have any one courting my mother." "Courting of thy mother, lad?" cried Farmer Snowe, with as much amazement as if the thing were impossible. "Why, who ever hath been doing of it?" "Yes, courting of my mother, sir; and you know best who comes doing it." "Wull, wull, what will boys be up to next? Should have thought herself were the proper judge. No thank'ee, lad, no need of thy light. Know the way to my own door at last, and have a right to go there." And he shut me out, without so much as offering me a drink of cider. The next afternoon, when work was over, I had seen to the horses, for now it was foolish to trust John Fry, because he had so many children, and his wife had taken to scolding. And just as I was saying to myself that in 5 days more my month would be gone, and myself free to seek Lorna, a man came riding up from the ford where the road goes through the Lynn stream. As soon as I saw that it was not Tom Faggus, I went no further to meet him, counting that it must be some traveller bound for Brendon or Cheriton, and likely enough he would come and beg for a draught of milk or cider, and then on again, after asking the way. But instead of that, he stopped at our gate, and stood up from his saddle, and halloed as if he were somebody; and all the time he was flourishing a white thing in the air, like the bands our parson weareth. So I crossed the courtyard to speak with him. 'Service of the King,' he saith, 'service of our Lord the King. Come hither, thou great yokel, at risk of fine and imprisonment.' Although not pleased with this, I went to him, as became a loyal man, quite at my leisure, however, for there is no man born who can hurry me, though I hasten for any woman. 'Plover Barrow's farm?' said he. 'God only knows how tired I be. Is there anywhere in this cursed county a cursed place called Plover Barrow's farm? For last 20 mile at least they told me 'twere only half a mile farther, or only just round corner. Now tell me that, and I fain would thwack thee, if thou wert not twice my size.' 'Sir,' I replied, 'you shall not have the trouble. This is Plover Barrow's farm, and you are kindly welcome. Sheep's kidneys is for supper, and the ale got bright from the tapping. But why do you think ill of us? We like not to be cursed so.' 'Nay, I think no ill,' he said. 'Sheep's kidneys is good, uncommon good, if they do them without burning. But I be so galled in the saddle 10 days, and never a comely meal of it. And when they hear King's service cried, they give me the worst of everything, all the way down from London. I had a rogue of a fellow in front of me, eating the fat of the land before me, and every one bowing down to him. He could go 3 miles to my one, though he never changed his horse. He might have robbed me at any minute, if I had been worth the trouble. A red mare he rideth, strong in the loins, and pointed quite small in the head. I shall live to see him hanged yet.' All this time he was riding across the straw of our courtyard, getting his weary legs out of the leathers, and almost afraid to stand yet. A coarse-grained, hard-faced man he was, some 40 years of age or so, and of middle height and stature. He was dressed in a dark brown riding suit, none the better for Exmoor mud, but fitting him very differently from the fashion of our tailors. Across the holsters lay his cloak, made of some red skin, and shining from the sweating of the horse. As I looked down on his stiff bright headpiece, small quick eyes, and black needly beard, he seemed to despise me, too much, as I thought, for a mere ignoramus and country bumpkin. 'Annie, have down the cut ham,' I shouted, for my sister was come to the door by chance, or because of the sound of a horse in the road. 'And cut a few rashers of hung deer's meat. There is a gentleman come to sup, Annie. And fetch the hops out of the tap with a skewer, that it may run more sparkling.' 'I wish I may go to a place never meant for me,' said my new friend, now wiping his mouth with the sleeve of his brown riding coat, 'if ever I fell among such good folk. You are the right sort, and no error therein. All this shall go down in your favour greatly when I make deposition. At least, I mean, if it be as good in the eating as in the hearing. 'Tis a supper quite fit for Tom Faggus himself, the man who hath stolen my victuals so. And that hung deer's meat, now is it of the red deer running wild in these parts?' 'To be sure it is, sir,' I answered. 'Where should we get any other?' 'Right, right. You are right, my son. I have heard that the flavour is marvellous. Some of them came and scared me so in the fog of the morning, that I hungered for them ever since. Ha, ha, I saw their haunches. But the young lady will not forget. Art sure she will not forget it?' 'You may trust her to forget nothing, sir, that may tempt a guest to his comfort.' 'In faith then I will leave my horse in your hands, and be off for it. Half the pleasure of the mouth is in the nose beforehand. But stay, almost I forgot my business in the hurry which thy tongue hath spread through my lately despairing belly. Hungry I am, and sore of body from my heels right upwards, and sorest in front of my doublet. Yet may I not rest nor bite barley bread until I have seen and touched John Ridd.' God grant that he be not far away. I must eat my saddle if it be so.' 'Have no fear, good sir,' I answered. 'You have seen and touched John Ridd. I am he, and not one likely to go beneath a bushel.' 'It would take a large bushel to hold thee, John Ridd. In the name of the King, his Majesty, Charles the Second, these presents.' He touched me with the white thing which I had first seen him waving, and which I now beheld to be sheepskin, such as they call parchment. It was tied across with cord, and fastened down in every corner with unsightly dabs of wax. By order of the messenger, for I was over frightened now to think of doing anything, I broke enough of the seals to keep an Easter ghost from rising, and there I saw my name in large. God grant such another shock may never befall me in my old age. 'Read, my son, read, thou great fool, if indeed thou canst read,' said the officer to encourage me. 'There is nothing to kill thee, boy, and my supper will be spoiling. Stare not at me so, thou fool, thou art big enough to eat me. Read, read, read.' 'If you please, sir, what is your name?' I asked, though why I asked him I know not, except from fear of witchcraft. 'Jeremy Stickles is my name, lad. Nothing more than a poor apparitor of the worshipful court of King's Bench. And at this moment a starving one, and no supper for me, unless you wilt read.' Being compelled in this way, I read pretty nigh as follows, not that I give the whole of it, but only the gist and the emphasis. 'To our good subject John Ridd,' etc., describing me ever so much better than I knew myself. 'By these presents, greeting. These are to require thee, in the name of our Lord the King, to appear in person before the right worshipful, the justices of his Majesty's bench at Westminster, laying aside all thine own business, and there to deliver such evidence as is within thy cognizance, touching certain matters whereby the peace of our said Lord the King, and the well-being of his realm is, are, or otherwise may be, impeached, impugned, imperilled, or otherwise detrimented, as witness these presents.' And then there were 4 seals, and then a signature I could not make out, only that it began with a J, and ended with some other writing, done almost in a circle. Underneath was added, in a different handwriting, 'Charges will be borne. The matter is full urgent.' The messenger watched me, while I read so much as I could read of it, and he seemed well pleased with my surprise, because he had expected it. Then, not knowing what else to do, I looked again at the cover, and on the top of it I saw, 'Ride, ride, ride on his gracious Majesty's business. Spur and spare not.' It may be supposed by all who know me, that I was taken hereupon with such a giddiness in my head, and noisiness in my ears, that I was forced to hold by the crook driven in below the thatch, for holding of the hay rakes. There was scarcely any sense left in me, only that the thing was come by power of Mother Meldrum, because I despised her warning, and had again sought Lorna. But the officer was grieved for me, and the danger to his supper. 'My son, be not afraid,' he said. 'We are not going to skin thee. Only thou tell all the truth, and it shall be. But never mind, I will tell thee all about it, and how to come out harmless, if I find thy victuals good, and no delay in serving them.' 'We do our best, sir, without bargain,' said I, 'to please our visitors.' But when my mother saw the parchment, for we could not keep it from her, she fell away into her favourite bed of stock gillyflowers, which she had been tending, and when we brought her round again, did nothing but exclaim against the wickedness of the age and people. It was useless to tell her. She knew what it was, and so should all the parish know. The King had heard that her son was how sober and quiet and diligent, and the strongest young man in England, and being himself such a reprobate, God forgive her for saying so, but he could never rest till he got poor Johnny, and made him as dissolute as himself. And if he did that,' here mother went off into a fit of crying, and Annie minded her face, while Lizzie saw that her gown was in comely order. But the character of the King improved, when Master Jeremy Stickles, being really moved by the look of it, and no bad man after all, laid it clearly before my mother that the king on his throne was unhappy until he had seen John rid; that the fame of John had gone so far, and his size, and all his virtues, that verily by the God who made him, the king was overcome with it. Then mother lay back in her garden chair, and smiled upon the whole of us, and most of all on Jeremy, looking only shyly on me, and speaking through some break of tears. 'His Majesty shall have my John. His Majesty is very good. But only for a fortnight. I want no titles for him. Johnny is enough for me, and Master John for the working men.' Now, though my mother was so willing that I should go to London, expecting great promotion and high glory for me, I myself was deeply gone into the pit of sorrow. For what would Lorna think of me? Here was the long month just expired, after worlds of waiting. There would be her lovely self, peeping softly down the glen, and fearing to encourage me. Yet there would be nobody else, and what an insult to her! Dwelling upon this, and seeing no chance of escape from it, I could not find one wink of sleep, though Jeremy Stickles, who slept close by, snored loud enough to spare me some. For I felt myself to be, as it were, in a place of some importance, in a situation of trust, I may say, and bound not to depart from it. For who could tell what the king might have to say to me about the Doones? And I felt that they were at the bottom of this strange appearance; or what his Majesty might think, if after receiving a message from him, trusty under so many seals, I were to violate his faith in me as churchwarden's son, and falsely spread his words abroad. Perhaps I was not wise in building such a wall of scruples. Nevertheless, all that was there, and weighed upon me heavily; and at last I made up my mind to this, that even Lorna must not know the reason of my going, neither anything about it; but that she might know I was gone a long way from home, and perhaps be sorry for it. Now, how was I to let her know even that much of the matter, without breaking compact? Puzzling on this, I fell asleep, after the proper time to get up; nor was I to be seen at breakfast time; and mother, being quite strange to that, was very uneasy about it. But Master Stickles assured her that the king's writ often had that effect, and the symptom was a good one. 'Now, Master Stickles, when must we start?' I asked him, as he lounged in the yard, gazing at our turkey poults, picking and running in the sun to the tune of their father's gobble. 'Your horse was greatly foundered, sir, and is hardly fit for the road to day; and Smiler was sledding yesterday all up the higher cleve, and none of the rest can carry me.' 'In a few more years,' replied the king's officer, contemplating me with much satisfaction, ''twill be a cruelty to any horse to put thee on his back, John.' Master Stickles by this time was quite familiar with us, calling me Jack, and Eliza Lizzie, and what I liked the least of all, our pretty Annie, Nancy. 'That will be as God pleases, sir,' I answered him rather sharply; 'and the horse that suffers will not be thine. But I wish to know when we must start upon our long travel to London town. I perceive that the matter is of great dispatch and urgency.' 'To be sure so it is, my son. But I see a yearling turkey there, him I mean with the hop in his walk, who, if I know aught of fowls, would roast well to morrow. Thy mother must have preparation; it is no more than reasonable. Now have that turkey killed to night, for his fatness makes me long for him; and we will have him for dinner to morrow, with perhaps one of his brethren, and a few more collops of red deer's flesh for supper; and then on the Friday morning, with the grace of God, we will set our faces to the road upon his Majesty's business.' 'Nay, but good sir,' I asked with much trembling, so eager was I to see Lorna, 'if his Majesty's business will keep until Friday, may it not keep until Monday? We have a litter of sucking pigs, excellently choice and white, 6 weeks old come Friday. There be too many for the sow, and one of them needeth roasting. Think you not it would be a pity to leave the women to carve it?' 'My son Jack,' replied Master Stickles, 'never was I in such quarters yet. and God forbid that I should be so unthankful to him as to hurry away. And now I think on it, Friday is not a day upon which pious people love to commence on enterprise. I will choose the young pig to morrow at noon, at which time they are wont to gamble, and we will celebrate his birthday by carving him on Friday. After that we will gird our loins and set forth early on Saturday." Now this was little better to me than if we'd set forth at once, Sunday being the very first day upon which it would be honourable for me to enter Glen Doone. But though I tried every possible means with Master Jeremy Stickles, offering him the choice of dinner for every beast that was on the farm, he durst not put off our departure later than the Saturday; and nothing else but love of us and of our hospitality would have so persuaded him to remain with us till then. Therefore now my only chance of seeing Lorna before I went lay in watching from the cliff and espying her, or a signal from her. This however I did in vain, until my eyes were weary, and often would delude themselves with hope of what they ached for. But though I lay hidden behind the trees upon the crest of the stony fall, and waited so quiet that the rabbits and squirrels played around me, and even the keen-eyed weasel took me for a trunk of wood, it was all as one. No cast of colour changed the white stone, whose whiteness now was hateful to me, nor did wreath or skirt or maiden break the loneliness of the vale. End of chapter 23. Recording by Rachel Linton, Bristol, UK.
Chapter 24 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 24. A safe pass for King's Messenger. A journey to London seemed to us in those bygone days as hazardous and dark an adventure as could be forced on any man. I mean, of course, a poor man. For to a great nobleman with ever so many outriders, attendants, and retainers, the risk was not so great, unless the highwaymen knew of their coming beforehand, and so combined against them. To a poor man, however, the risk was not so much from those gentlemen of the road, as from the more ignoble footpads, and the landlords of the lesser hostels, and the loose unguarded soldiers, over and above the pitfalls and the quagmires of the way, so that it was hard to settle, at the first outgoing, whether a man were wise to pray more for his neck or for his head. But nowadays it is very different. Not that highwaymen are scarce, in this the reign of our good Queen Anne, for in truth they thrive as well as ever, albeit they deserve it not, being less upright and courteous; but that the roads are much improved, and the growing use of stage wagons, some of which will travel as much as 40 miles in a summer day, has turned our ancient ideas of distance almost upside down, and I doubt whether God be pleased with our flying so fast away from Him. However, that is not my business, nor does it lie in my mouth to speak very strongly upon the subject, seeing how much I myself have done towards making of roads upon Exmoor. To return to my story, and in truth I lose that road too often, it would have taken 10 King's messengers to get me away from Plover's Barrows without one goodbye to Lorna, but for my sense of the trust and reliance which His Majesty had reposed in me. And now I felt most bitterly how the very arrangements which seemed so wise, and indeed ingenious, may by the force of events become our most fatal obstacles. For lo! I was blocked entirely from going to see Lorna, whereas we should have fixed it so that I might as well have the power of signalling my necessity. It was too late now to think of that, and so I made up my mind at last to keep my honour on both sides, both to the King and to the maiden, although I might lose everything, except a heavy heart for it. And indeed more hearts than mine were heavy, for when it came to the tug of parting, my mother was like, and so was Annie, to break down altogether. But I bade them be of good cheer, and smiled in the briskest manner upon them, and said that I should be back next week, as one of His Majesty's greatest captains, and told them not to fear me then. Upon which they smiled at the idea of ever being afraid of me, whatever dress I might have on; and so I kissed my hand once more, and rode away very bravely. But bless your heart, I could no more have done so than flown all the way to London, if Jeremy Stickles had not been there. And, not to take too much credit to myself in this matter, I must confess that when we were come to the turn in the road where the moor begins, and whence you see the last of the yard, and the ricks and the poultry round them, and can, by knowing the place, obtain a glance of the kitchen window under the walnut tree, it went so hard with me just here, that I even made pretence of a stone in ancient Smiler's shoe to dismount, and to bend my head a while. Then, knowing that those I had left behind would be watching to see the last of me, and might have false hopes of my coming back, I mounted again with all possible courage, and rode after Jeremy Stickles. Jeremy, seeing how much I was down, did his best to keep me up with jokes and tales and light discourse, until before we had ridden a league, I began to long to see the things he was describing. The air, the weather, and the thoughts of going to a wondrous place, added to the fine company (at least so Jeremy said it was) of a man who knew all London, made me feel that I should be ungracious not to laugh a little. And being very simple then, I laughed no more a little, but something quite considerable (though free from consideration) at the strange things Master Stickles told me, and his strange way of telling them. And so we became very excellent friends, for he was much pleased with my laughing. Not wishing to thrust myself more forward than need be in this narrative, I have scarcely thought it becoming or right to speak of my own adornments. But now, what with the brave clothes I had on, and the better ones still that were packed up in the bag behind the saddle, it is almost beyond me to forbear saying that I must have looked very pleasing. And many a time I wished, going along, that Lorna could only be here and there, watching behind a furze bush, looking at me, and wondering how much my clothes had cost. For mother would have no stint in the matter, but had assembled at our house, immediately upon knowledge of what was to be about London, every man known to be a good stitcher upon our side of Exmoor; and for 3 days they had worked their best, without stint, of beer or cider, according to the constitution of each. The result, so they all declared, was such as to create admiration, and defy competition in London; and to me it seemed that they were quite right, though Jeremy Stickles turned up his nose, and feigned to be deaf in the business. Now be that matter as you please, for the point is not worth arguing. Certain it is that my appearance was better than it had been before. For being in the best clothes, one tries to look and to act, so far as may be, up to the quality of them; not only for the fear of soiling them, but that they enlarge a man's perception of his value. And it strikes me that our sins arise, partly from disdain of others, but mainly from contempt of self, both working the despite of God. But men of mind may not be measured by such paltry rule as this. By dinner time we arrived at Porlock, and dined with my old friend Master Pooke, now growing rich and portly. For though we had plenty of victuals with us, we were not to begin upon them until all chance of victualling among our friends was left behind; and during that first day we had no need to meddle with our store at all; for as had been settled before we left home, we lay that night at Dunster in the house of a worthy tanner, first cousin to my mother, who received us very cordially, and undertook to return old Smiler to his stable at Plover's Barrows after 1 day's rest. Thence we hired to Bridgewater, and from Bridgewater on to Bristow, breaking the journey between the two. But although the whole way was so new to me, and such a perpetual source of conflict, that the remembrance still abides with me as if it were but yesterday, I must not be so long in telling as it was in travelling, or you will wish me farther, both because Lorna was nothing there, and also because a man in our neighbourhood had done the whole of it since my time, and feigns to think nothing of it. However, one thing, in common justice to a person who has been traduced, I am bound to mention; and this is, that being 2 of us, and myself of such magnitude, we never could have made our journey without either fight or running, but for the free pass which dear Annie by some means, I know not what, had procured from Master Faggus. And when I let it be known, by some hap, that I was the own cousin of Tom Faggus, and honoured with his society, there was not a house upon the road but was proud to entertain me, in spite of my fellow traveller, bearing the red badge of the King. "I will keep this close, my son Jack," he said, having stripped it off with a carving knife. "Your flag is the best to fly. The man who starved me on the way down, the same shall feed me fat going home." Therefore we pursued our way, in excellent condition, having thriven upon the credit of that very popular highwayman, and being surrounded with regrets that he had left the profession, and sometimes begged to intercede that he might help the road again. For all the landlords on the road declared that now small ale was drunk, nor much of spirit called for, because the farmers need not prime to meet only common riders, neither were these worth the while to get drunk with afterwards. Master Stickles himself undertook, as an officer of the King's Justices, to plead this case with Squire Faggus, as everybody called him now, and to induce him, for the general good, to return to his proper ministry. It was a long and weary journey, although the roads are wondrous good on the farther side of Bristol, and scarcely any man need be bogged if he keep his eyes well open, save perhaps in Berkshire. In consequence of the pass we had, and the vintner's knowledge of it, we only met 2 public riders, one of whom made off straightway when he saw my companion's pistols and the stout carbine I bore, and the other came to a parley with us, and proved most kind and affable when he knew himself in the presence of the cousin of Squire Faggus. "God save you, gentlemen," he cried, lifting his hat politely. "Many and many a happy day I have worked this road with him. Such times will never be again. But commend me to his love and prayers. King my name is, and king my nature. Say that, and none will harm you." And so he made off down the hill, being a perfect gentleman, and a very good horse he was riding. The night was falling very thick by the time we were come to Tyburn, and here the King's officer decided that it would be wise to halt, because the way was unsafe by night, across the fields to Charing village. I, for my part, was nothing loth, and preferred to see London by daylight. And, after all, it was not worth seeing, but a very hideous and dirty place, not at all like Exmoor. Some of the shops were very fine, and the signs above them finer still, so that I was never weary of standing still to look at them. But in doing this there was no ease, for before one could begin almost to make the meaning of them, either some of the wayfarers would bustle and scowl and draw their swords, or the owner or his apprentice boys would rush out and catch hold of me, crying, "Buy, buy, buy! What do you lack? What do you lack? Buy, buy, buy!" At first I mistook the meaning of this, for so we pronounce the word boy upon Exmoor, and I answered with some indignation, "Sirrah, I am no boy now, but a man of 21 years; and as for lacking, I lack naught from thee, except what thou hast not, good manners." The only things that pleased me much were the river Thames, and the hall and church of Westminster, where there are brave things to be seen, and braver still to think about. But whenever I wandered in the streets, what with the noise the people made, the number of the coaches, the running of the footmen, and the swaggering of great courtiers, and the thrusting aside of everybody, many and many a time I longed to be back among the sheep again, for fear of losing temper. They were welcome to the wall for me, as I took care to tell them, for I could stand without the wall, which perhaps was more than they could do. Though I said this with the best intention, meaning no discourtesy, some of them were vexed at it, and one young lord, being flushed with drink, drew his sword and made at me. But I struck it up with my holly stick, so that it flew on the roof of a house. Then I took him by the belt with one hand, and laid him in the kennel. This caused some little disturbance, but none of the rest saw fit to try how the matter might be with them. Now this being the year of our Lord 1683, more than 9 years and a half since the death of my father and the beginning of this history, all London was in a great ferment about the dispute between the court of the King and the city. The King, or rather perhaps his party, for they said that His Majesty cared for little except to have plenty of money and spend it, was quite resolved to be supreme in the appointment of the chief officers of the corporation. But the citizens maintained that, under their charter, this right lay entirely with themselves, upon which a writ was issued against them for forfeiture of their charter, and the question was now being tried in the court of His Majesty's bench. This seemed to occupy all the attention of the judges, and my case, which had appeared so urgent, was put off from time to time, while the court and the city contended. And so hot was the conflict and hate between them, that a sheriff had been fined by the King in £100,000, and a former Lord Mayor had even been sentenced to the pillory, because he would not swear falsely. Hence the courtiers and the citizens scarce could meet in the streets with patience, or without railing and frequent blows. Now although I heard so much of this matter, for nothing else was talked of, and it seeming to me more important even than the churchwardenship of heir, I could not for the life of me tell which side I should take to. For all my sense of position, and of confidence reposed in me, and of my father's opinions, lay heavily in one scale, while all my reason and my heart went down plump against injustice, and seemed to win the other scale. Even so my father had been, at the breaking out of the Civil War, when he was less than my age now, and even less skilled in politics. And my mother told me after this, when she saw how I myself was doubting, and vexed with myself for doing so, that my father used to thank God often that he had not been called upon to take one side or other, but might remain obscure and quiet. And yet he always considered himself to be a good sound royalist. But now as I stayed there, only desirous to be heard and to get away, and scarcely even guessing yet what was wanted of me (for even Jeremy Stickles knew not, or pretended not to know), things came to a dreadful pass between the King and all the people who dared to have an opinion. For about the middle of June the judges gave their sentence that the City of London had forfeited its charter, and that its franchise should be taken into the hands of the King. Scarcely was this judgment forth, and all men hotly talking of it, when a far worse thing befell. News of some great conspiracy was spread at every corner, and that a man in the malting business had tried to take up the brewer's work, and lop the King and the Duke of York. Everybody was shocked at this, for the King himself was not disliked so much as his advisers; but everybody was more than shocked, grieved indeed to the heart with pain, at hearing that Lord William Russell and Mr. Algernon Sidney had been seized and sent to the Tower of London, upon a charge of high treason. Having no knowledge of these great men, nor of the matter how far it was true, I had not very much to say about either of them or it. But this silence was not shared, although the ignorance may have been, by the hundreds of people around me. Such a commotion was astir, such universal sense of wrong, and stern resolve to right it, that every man grasped his fellow's hand, and led him into the vintners. Even I, although at that time given to excess in temperance, and afraid of the name of cordials, was hard set, I do assure you, not to be drunk at intervals without coarse discourtesy. However, that, as Betty Muxworthy used to say, when argued down and ready to take the mop for it, is neither here nor there. I have naught to do with great history, and am sorry for those who have to write it, because they are sure to have both friends and enemies in it, and cannot act as they would towards them, without damage to their own consciences. But as great events draw little ones, and the rattle of the churn decides the uncertainty of the flies, so this movement of the town, and eloquence and passion, had more than I guessed at the time to do with my own little fortunes. For in the first place, it was fixed, perhaps from downright contumely, because the citizens loved him so, that Lord Russell should be tried neither at Westminster nor at Lincoln's Inn, but at the Court of Old Bailey, within the precincts of the city. This kept me hanging on much longer, because although the good nobleman was to be tried by the Court of Common Pleas, yet the officers of King's Bench, to whom I daily applied myself, were in council with their fellows, and put me off from day to day. Now I had heard of the law's delays, which the greatest of all poets, knowing much of the law himself, as indeed of everything, has specially mentioned, when not expected, among the many ills of life. But I never thought, at my years, to have such bitter experience of the evil; and it seemed to me that if the lawyers failed to do their duty, they ought to pay people for waiting upon them, instead of making them pay for it. But here I was, now in the second month, living at my own charges in the house of a worthy fellmonger at the sign of the Seal and Squirrel, abutting upon the Strand Road, which leads from Temple Bar to Charing. Here I did very well indeed, having a mattress of good skin dressings, and plenty to eat every day of my life. But the butter was something to cry but thrice at, according to a conceit of our schooldays, and the milk must have come from cows driven to water. However, these evils were light compared with the heavy bills sent up to me every Saturday afternoon; and knowing how my mother had pinched to send me nobly to London, and had told me to spare for nothing, but live bravely with the best of them, the tears very nearly came into my eyes, as I thought, while I ate, of so robbing her. At length, being quite at the end of my money, and seeing no other help for it, I determined to listen to clerks no more, but force my way up to the justices, and insist upon being heard by them, or discharged from my recognizance. for so they had termed the bond or deed which I had been forced to execute in the presence of a chief clerk or notary, the very day after I came to London. And the purport of it was, that on pain of a heavy fine, or escheatment, I would hold myself ready and present, to give evidence when called upon. Having delivered me up to sign this, Jeremy Stickles was quit of me, and went upon other business; not but what he was kind and good to me, when his time and pursuits allowed of it. End of chapter 24. Read by Landy in Sydney, Australia, September 2008. Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 25. A great man attends to business. Having seen Lord Russell murdered in the fields of Lincoln's Inn, or rather having gone to see it, but turned away with a sickness and a bitter flood of tears, for a whiter and a nobler neck never fell before low beast, I strode away towards Westminster, cured of half my indignation at the death of Charles I. Many people hurried past me, chiefly of the more tender sort, revolting at the butchery. In their ghastly faces, as they turned them back, lest the sight should be coming after them, great sorrow was to be seen, and horror, and pity, and some anger. In Westminster Hall I found nobody, not even the crowd of crawling varlets, who used to be craving evermore for employment or for payment. I knocked at 3 doors, one after other, of lobbies going out of it, where I had formerly seen some officers, and people pressing in and out; but for my trouble I took nothing, except some thumps from echo. And at last an old man told me that all the lawyers were gone to see the results of their own works, in the fields of Lincoln's Inn. However, in a few days' time I had better fortune, for the court was sitting and full of business, to clear off the arrears of work before the lawyers' holiday. As I was waiting in the hall for a good occasion, a man with horsehair on his head, and a long blue bag in his left hand, touched me gently on the arm, and led me into a quiet place. I followed him very gladly, being confident that he came to me with a message from the justiciaries; but after taking pains to be sure that none could overhear us, he turned on me suddenly, and asked, "Now, John, how is your dear mother?" "Worshipful sir," I answered him, after recovering from my surprise at his knowledge of our affairs and kindly interest in them, "it is 2 months now since I have seen her. Would to God that I only knew how she is faring now, and how the business of the farm goes." "Sir, I respect and admire you," the old gentleman replied, with a bow very low and genteel. "Few young court gallants of our time are so reverent and dutiful. Oh, how I did love my mother!" Here he turned up his eyes to heaven, in a manner that made me feel for him, and yet with a kind of wonder. "I am very sorry for you, sir," I answered most respectfully, not meaning to trespass on his grief, yet wondering at his mother's age, for he seemed to be at least 60. "But I am no court gallant, sir. I am only a farmer's son, and learning how to farm a little." "Enough, John, quite enough," he cried. "I can read it in thy countenance. Honesty is written there, and courage, and simplicity. But I fear that, in this town of London, thou art apt to be taken in by people of no principle. Ah me, ah me! The world is bad, and I am too old to improve it." Then, finding him so good and kind, and anxious to improve the age, I told him almost everything: how much I paid the fellmonger, and all the things I had been to see, and how I longed to get away, before the corn was ripening; yet how, despite of these desires, I felt myself bound to walk up and down, being under a thing called recognizance. In short, I told him everything, except the nature of my summons, which I had no right to tell, and that I was out of money. My tale was told in a little archway, apart from other lawyers, and the other lawyers seemed to me to shift themselves, and to look askew, like sheep through a hurdle, when the rest are feeding. "What? Good God!" my lawyer cried, smiting his breast indignantly with a roll of something learned. "In what country do we live? Under what laws are we governed? No case before the court whatever. No primary deposition, so far as we are furnished, not even a king's writ issued, and here we have a fine young man dragged from his home and adoring mother, during the height of agriculture, at his own cost and charges. I have heard of many grievances, but this the very worst of all. Nothing short of a royal commission could be warranty for it. This is not only illegal, sir, but most gravely unconstitutional." "I had not told you, worthy sir," I answered him in a lower tone, "if I could have thought that your sense of right would be moved so painfully. But now I must beg to leave you, sir, for I see that the door again is open. I beg you, worshipful sir, to accept—" Upon this he put forth his hand and said, "Nay, nay, my son, not two, not two," yet looking away, that he might not scare me. "To accept, kind sir, my very best thanks and most respectful remembrances." And with that I laid my hand in his. "And if, sir, any circumstances of business or of pleasure should bring you to our part of the world, I trust you will not forget that my mother and myself, if ever I get home again, will do our best to make you comfortable with our poor hospitality." With this I was hasting away from him, but he held my hand and looked round at me, and he spoke without cordiality. "Young man, a general invitation is no entry for my fee book. I have spent a good hour of business time in mastering thy case and stating my opinion of it; and being a member of the bar, called 36 years ago by the Honourable Society of the Inner Temple, my fee is at my own discretion, albeit an honorarium. For the honour of the profession, and my position in it, I ought to charge thee at least 5 guineas, although I would have accepted 1 offered with good will and delicacy. Now I will enter it 2, my son, and 1/2 a crown for my clerk's fee." Saying this, he drew forth from his deep blue bag a red book having clasps to it, and endorsed in gold letters, "Fee book"; and before I could speak, being frightened so, he had entered on a page of it, "To consideration of ease as stated by John Ridd, and advising thereupon 2 guineas." "But, sir, good sir," I stammered forth, not having 2 guineas left in the world, yet grieving to confess it, "I knew not that I was to pay, learned sir. I never thought of it in that way." "Wounds of God! In what way thought you that a lawyer listened to your rigmarole?" "I thought you listened from kindness, sir, and compassion of my grievous case, and a sort of liking for me." "A lawyer like thee, young curmudgeon! A lawyer afford to feel compassion gratis! Either thou art a very deep knave, or the greenest of all greenhorns. Well, I suppose I must let thee off for 1 guinea, and the clerk's fee. A bad business, a shocking business." Now if this man had continued kind and soft, as when he heard my story, I would have pawned my clothes to pay him, rather than leave a debt behind, although contracted unwittingly. But when he used harsh language so, knowing that I did not deserve it, I began to doubt within myself whether he deserved my money. Therefore I answered him with some readiness, such as comes sometimes to me, although I am so slow. "Sir, I am no curmudgeon. If a young man had called me so, it would not have been well with him. This money shall be paid, if due, albeit I had no desire to incur the debt. You have advised me that the court is liable for my expenses, so far as they be reasonable. If this be a reasonable expense, come with me now to Lord Justice Jeffreys, and receive from him the 2 guineas, or, it may be, 5, for the counsel you have given me to deny his jurisdiction." With these words I took his arm to lead him, for the door was open still. "In the name of God, boy, let me go! Worthy sir, pray let me go! My wife is sick, and my daughter dying. In the name of God, sir, let me go!" "Nay, nay," I said, having fast hold of him, "I cannot let thee go unpaid, sir. Right is right, and thou shalt have it." "Ruin is what I shall have, boy, if you drag me before that devil. He will strike me from the bar at once, and starve me and all my family. Here, lad, good lad, take these 2 guineas. Thou hast despoiled the spoiler. Never again will I trust mine eyes for knowledge of a greenhorn." He slipped 2 guineas into the hand which I had hooked through his elbow, and spoke in an urgent whisper again, for the people came crowding around us. "For God's sake, let me go, boy. Another moment will be too late." "Learned sir," I answered him, "twice you spoke, unless I err, of the necessity of a clerk's fee as a thing to be lamented." To be sure, my son. You have a clerk as much as I have. There it is. Now, I pray thee, take to the study of the law. possession is 9 points of it, which thou hast of me. Self-possession is the 10th, and that thou hast more than the other 9. Being flattered by this, and by the feeling of the 2 guineas and half-crown, I dropped my hold upon Counsellor Kitch, for he was no less a man than that, and he was out of sight in a second of time, wig, blue bag, and family. And before I had time to make up my mind what I should do with his money, for of course I meant not to keep it, the crier of the court, as they told me, came out, and wanted to know who I was. I told him, as shortly as I could, that my business lay with His Majesty's bench, and was very confidential. Upon which he took me inside with warning, and showed me to an under clerk, who showed me to a higher one, and the higher clerk to the head one. When this gentleman understood all about my business, which I told him without complaint, he frowned at me very heavily, as if I had done him an injury. "John Ridd," he asked me with a stern glance, "is it your deliberate desire to be brought into the presence of the Lord Chief Justice?" "Surely, sir, it has been my desire for the last 2 months and more." "Then, John, thou shalt be. But mind one thing, not a word of thy long detention, or thou mayest get into trouble." "How, sir, for being detained against my own wish?" I asked him; but he turned away, as if that matter were not worth his arguing, as, indeed, I suppose it was not, and led me through a little passage to a door with a curtain across it. "Now, if my lord cross-question you," the gentleman whispered to me, "answer him straight out truth at once, for he will have it out of thee. And mind, he loves not to be contradicted, neither can he bear a hangdog look. Take little heed of the other 2, but note every word of the middle one, and never make him speak twice." I thanked him for his good advice, as he moved the curtain and thrust me in, but instead of entering, withdrew, and left me to bear the brunt of it. The chamber was not very large, though lofty to my eyes, and dark, with wooden panels round it. At the further end were some raised seats, such as I have seen in churches, lined with velvet, and having broad elbows, and a canopy over the middle seat. There were only 3 men sitting here, one in the centre and one on each side, and all 3 were done up wonderfully with fur, and robes of state, and curls of thick grey horsehair, crimped and gathered and plaited down to their shoulders. Each man had an oak desk before him, set at a little distance, and spread with pens and papers. Instead of writing, however, they seemed to be laughing and talking, or rather, the one in the middle seemed to be telling some good story, which the others received with approval. By reason of their great perukes, it was hard to tell how old they were, but the one who was speaking seemed the youngest, although he was the chief of them. A thick-set, burly, and bulky man, with a blotchy broad face, and great square jaws, and fierce eyes full of blazes, he was one to be dreaded by gentle souls, and to be abhorred by the noble. Between me and the 3 Lord Judges, some few lawyers were gathering up bags, and papers, and pens, and so forth, from a narrow table in the middle of the room, as if a case had been disposed of, and no other were called on. But before I had time to look round twice, the stout fierce man espied me, and shouted out with a flashing stare, "How now, countryman? Who art thou?" "May it please your worship," I answered him loudly, "I am John Ridd, of Oare parish, in the shire of Somerset, brought to this London some 2 months back by a special messenger, whose name is Jeremy Stickles, and then bound over to be at hand and ready, when called upon to give evidence in a matter unknown to me, but touching the peace of our lord the King, and the well-being of his subjects. 3 times I have met our lord the King, but he hath said nothing about his peace, and only held it towards me; and every day, save Sunday, I have walked up and down the great hall of Westminster, all the business part of the day, expecting to be called upon, yet no one hath called upon me. And now I desire to ask your worship, whether I may go home again." "Well done, John," replied his lordship, while I was panting with all this speech. "I will go bail for thee, John. Thou hast never made such a long speech before, and thou art a spunky Briton, or thou couldst not have made it now. I remember the matter well, and I myself will attend to it, although it arose before my time," he was but newly Chief Justice, "but I cannot take it now, John. There is no fear of losing thee, John, any more than the Tower of London. I grieve for His Majesty's exchequer, after keeping thee 2 months or more." "Nay, my lord, I crave your pardon. My mother hath been keeping me. Not a groat have I received." "Spank, is it so?" his lordship cried, in a voice that shook the cobwebs, and the frown on his brow shook the hearts of men, and mine as much as the rest of them. "Spank, Is his Majesty come to this, that he starves his own approvers?" My lord," whispered Mr. Spank, the chief officer of evidence, "the thing hath been overlooked, my lord, among such grave matters of treason." "I will overlook thy head, foul Spank, on a spike from Temple Bar, if ever I hear of the like again. Vile varlet, what art thou paid for? Thou hast swindled the money thyself, foul Spank, I know thee, though thou art new to me. Bitter is the day for thee that ever I came across thee. Answer me not. One word more, and I will have thee on a hurdle." And he swung himself to and fro on his bench, with both hands on his knees, and every man waited to let it pass, knowing better than to speak to him. "John Ridd," said the Lord Chief Justice, at last recovering a sort of dignity, yet daring Spank from the corners of his eyes to do so much as look at him, "thou hast been shamefully used, John Ridd. Answer me not, boy, not a word, but go to Master Spank, and let me know how he behaves to thee." Here he made a glance at Spank, which is worth at least £10 to me. "Be thou here again to morrow, and before any other case is taken, I will see justice done to thee. Now be off, boy. Thy name is Ridd, and we are well rid of thee." I was only too glad to go, after all this tempest, as you may well suppose. For if ever I saw a man's eyes become two holes for the devil to glare from, I saw it that day, and the eyes were those of the Lord Chief Justice Jeffreys. Mr. Spank was in the lobby before me, and before I had recovered myself, for I was vexed with my own terror, he came up sidling and fawning to me with a heavy bag of yellow leather. "Good Master Ridd, take it all, and say a good word for me to his lordship. He hath taken a strange fancy to thee, and thou must make the most of it. We never saw man meet him eye to eye so, and yet not contradict him, and that is just what he loveth. Abide in London, Master Ridd, and he will make thy fortune. His joke upon thy name proves that. And I pray you remember, Master Ridd, that the Spanks are 16 in family." But I would not take the bag from him, regarding it as a sort of bribe to pay me such a lump of money, without so much as asking how great had been my expenses. Therefore I only told him that if he would kindly keep the cash for me until the morrow, I would spend the rest of the day in counting (which is always sore work with me) how much it had stood me in board and lodging, since Master Stickles had rendered me up, for until that time he had borne my expenses. In the morning I would give Mr. Spank a memorandum, duly signed and attested by my landlord, including the breakfast of that day, and in exchange for this I would take the exact amount from the yellow bag, and be very thankful for it. "If that is thy way of using opportunity," said Spank, looking at me with some contempt, "thou wilt never thrive in these times, my lad. Even the Lord Chief Justice can be little help to thee, unless thou knowest better than that how to help thyself." It mattered not to me. The word approver stuck in my gorge, as used by the Lord Chief Justice, for we looked upon an approver as a very low thing indeed. I would rather pay for every breakfast, and even every dinner, eaten by me since here I came, than take money as an approver. And indeed I was much disappointed at being taken in that light, having understood that I was sent for as a trusty subject, and humble friend of His Majesty. In the morning I met Mr. Spank waiting for me at the entrance, and very desirous to see me. I showed him my bill made out in fair copy, and he laughed at it, and said, "Take it twice over, Master Ridd, once for thine own sake, and once for His Majesty's, as all his loyal tradesmen do, when they can get any. His Majesty knows, and is proud of it, for it shows their love of his countenance, and he says, 'Bis dat ye sit or dat,' then how can I grumble at giving twice, when I give so slowly?" "Nay, I will take it but once," I said. "If His Majesty loves to be robbed, he need not lack of his desire, while the Spanks are 16 in family." The clerk smiled cheerfully at this, being proud of his children's ability; and then, having paid my account, he whispered, "He is all alone this morning, John, and in rare good humour. He hath been promised the handling of poor Master Algernon Sidney, and he says he will soon make a republic of him, for his state shall shortly be headless. He is chuckling over his joke like a pig with a nut, and that always makes him pleasant. John Ridd, my lord." With that he swung up the curtain bravely, and according to special orders I stood face to face and alone with Judge Jeffreys. End of chapter 25. Read by Landy in Sydney, Australia, September 2008.